channel. It was going to be my first story that I did. Like I say, it was my very first story. And then in a dopey thing that I was going through, I don't know what I was doing. I deleted it. I don't know what happened, but I deleted it. I didn't think I could, and it deleted. It was a whole thing. So then I redid the story, probably, it was a couple of months later. So still, I'd figure about 2019. So that's the pre-recorded one you'll see. It's probably about 7, 8 stories, I think, in. And then here we are again. So I'm going to do this one for you now. Like I say, it is the case that shocked Britain, the Kellyanne Bates story. I'm going to stop for you now, okay? Kellyanne Bates, again, a reason it resonated with me. She was born on the 18th of May, 78. So born in the same year. She was born in Hattersley, Manchester. Her mum called Margaret, her dad Tommy. She also had an older brother. Now, with Kellyanne, very mature for her age. Really mature for her age, actually. And it said she always hung about with friends older than her. Not just where they'd be older than her in school. It was friends out of school that had left school that she was friends with. You know, very, very outgoing girl. Wanted to be a teacher. Had, obviously, all her life going for her. She was just, she just was one of these that were just ahead of her time, I think. That's what I think about Kelly. Now, for a second, I'm going to switch. Only for a second, that's Kelly. Now, we're going to go to a man called James Patterson Smith. Okay. James Patterson Smith was born in 1948, also in Manchester. Now, in 1948, and obviously going into the 50s, it was a poor time, especially in the north of England. It took a hit, as we know. But he didn't have a bad childhood at all. It was said, not much money, but neither did any of his friends, no one around the areas. You know, there weren't rich and poor, there were just, everyone was poor. So everyone got on. And look, say he had a couple of scuffles with other lads, which was perfectly normal back then. But for the most part, he was doing okay. Anyway, when he got to senior school, he didn't study very well. He couldn't get his head down. So he left school, not really with a lot of options, let's say. So as he turned, obviously he'd gone into his teens. We're now into the 1960s. The work wasn't great. To find work at that time, it wasn't great anyway. So, you know, he in and out of jobs, but finding it harder and harder to find one. And people had started to notice his family, that he'd started to sort of become quite angry, and this temper had started to pick up, let's say. Not outside. Outside of the house, he was very well dressed, it was said. He was very well liked, very friendly, very polite. But it was just said that indoors, it was noticed he was very impatient, and this temper had started to rile up in him. And it was said that as he was going into the 70s, you know, where work was starting to pick up, but he still couldn't get a job, he was starting to get quite frustrated with the world as he saw it, that was holding him down, that kind of attitude. Now, like I say, in the 70s was when he first got married, and it didn't last long, his first marriage, and it was because he got quite violent with his first wife, and she just put up with it. She put up with it for a while. She did. She put up with it for quite a few years, and in the end, she was I just couldn't put up with it anymore. So his first wife leaves him, which he obviously wasn't very happy with, but he quickly met a girl called Tina Watson. Now, this was in about 1980, a very early 80s. Now, Tina Watson, she was aged 20. By this point, he was 32. All right. So he's already showing signs of really liking younger girls. And even though she got pregnant by him quite quickly, he'd been sort of giving her I'm not being flippant here, but it was sort of the odd slap, let's say, up until she got pregnant. Once she got pregnant, that escalated completely. And she ran while she was pregnant to get away from him. Now, as happens, and as we know, women in those situations, the most dangerous time for a woman or a man, but if, for the sake of this story, for a woman, is when is when they go to leave. Oh God, sorry about this, but I know if I don't do that, it's going to keep coming. There we go. The most dangerous part is when they're going to leave, and they say that it's the younger girls that are more inclined to think, I'm not putting up with this, and leave. So it said that the numbers of domestic violence assaults and deaths are amongst the younger, what's the word I'm looking for? The younger group of women, is because it's the younger girls that will eventually get up there not to run. Older women who've obviously put up with it for so long are more inclined for, I don't know what reason, but to see out. I suppose maybe they think it changed. Maybe it's they've been under that abuse for so long. They've just been, beaten down so much, they just don't feel they can leave. So the demographic that's the highest, that's what I was looking for, the demographic that's the highest apparently in deaths and serious assault is the younger demographic, because they're the girls that will leave. So like I say, she left while she was pregnant, but he did stalk her. He didn't let her go quietly. But then he met another girl, 15-year-old Wendy. Now, 15-year-old Wendy, he met when he was 34. They're getting younger, as you can see. And it said that it was because he can mold them. He can do what, he can do what he wants to them. And because they haven't experienced life of sorts, they, for the most part, think this must be how life is. This is how relationships are. Now, it would depend on what relationship they've seen in their upbringing. Have they seen happy parents? Is it a single mom? I'm not blaming any of this. I'm just saying that if you saw your parents and they grew up happy, would you believe that this is the way to go? I don't know. Touch wood, I've been very lucky. So I'm not going to throw my hat into the ring in any of this. So basically, when Wendy, like I say, who was 15 and James was 34, he started beating her very early on. Now, there was a little something between Tina and Wendy that had a connection. And what it is that James tried to drown them both. He tried to drown Tina in the bath. She was having a bath. She's pregnant. This was the final straw for her. She's in the bath and she's pregnant. And he just walks up, grabs her by her throat and tries to drown her and her unborn baby. That's what triggered her to go. And then young Wendy, who's only 15 when he'd started seeing her, she's washing her hair in the sink. And he comes up and he tries to drown her. Now, going this way into water, that must have been both of them must have been horrific. I'm just thinking if you're kind of upside down. Oh, God. So she leaves. So Wendy leaves. So now James is single. Okay. So now we're going to come back to Kelly. You know where this is going, don't you? But in 1992, now at this point, James is 44 years old. In 1992, Kelly was 14 years old. And like I say, quite an outgoing girl. So she had a bit more freedom. You know, it's the early 90s. I remember it being 14. I could go out. I mean, I think I said this in my original story. I had, which Tiffany can attest to, we had quite strict parents. We did. You know, they'd know where we were. We were only allowed out for very short spurts of time. Like, I didn't have a mobile. Mobiles weren't a thing, so it would be for they would know where I was. You know, even though I wasn't exactly in someone's house, but they'd know for the most part where I was. I wasn't allowed out. It was kind of lights come on, straight lights come on, you're in. It was that kind of still from the 80s, that mentality. And of course at 14, 15, you're a bit like, you wanna kick out against things, but when I look back, I'm so grateful. I genuinely am. Because I could have got into so much trouble had they not been as kind of on the ball as they was. Now, I'm not saying Kelly's weren't. I'm just saying mine were very, very strict. Okay. Look, so me and Kelly the same age. I remember 1992 very well. And that's the only reason I'm doing the similarity there. So Kelly would be able to go out with friends and stuff like much of us were able to, but she'd also do babysitting. Okay. And on the one evening while she was babysitting, I believe when the couple came back, they had a friend with them. That friend happened to be James Patterson. Okay. And he offered quite chivalrous, offered to walk Kelly home, you know. And she was taken with him. She was taken with this man, you know, older man, and he seemed so charming. And she was completely taken in by him. And for the next, say, year or so, she'd sneak out to see him. She'd sneak out of the bedroom window. She really rebelled. She'd go and miss him for days at a time. You know, her parents start to pull their hairs out. You know, they've had this golden girl who, although she was quite strong-minded and, like I say, she mixed with a much older group, she was very trustworthy. And all of a sudden now they're coming up against this teenager who isn't listening to what they say at all, and she's not doing as she's told, and she's not coming home when she's supposed to. She's not coming home for days. So they started really tearing their hair out with her. And anyway, eventually, when Kelly turned 16, remember, for anyone watching who's not in England, age of consent is 16. So we can see why they waited till 16. I'm saying they, we know who it was. But around 16, she decides to introduce James, but she doesn't introduce him as James. She introduces him as Dave Smith under his kind of instruction. He's Dave Smith and he's 32. So he's starting the lowest straight from the beginning of meeting her family. And now Margaret, Kelly's mom, now this story, like I say, when I first came across it, it was on Britain's Darkest Taboos. And in her interview, she said that when she saw him in her home, he was coming down the stairs. I think he'd been using the toilet or something. And when he was coming down the stairs, She said her blood run cold. It actually run cold. And she said that she got this intense sort of urge. She said she wanted to stab him with a bread knife from the kitchen. Now that, upon first meeting someone is a very strong response. So it says something, doesn't it? It says something that upon meeting her daughter's partner, that was her initial response. So the hairs went up on her neck and she wanted to stab the guy. So I have heard, though, that people, upon meeting bad people, can sense it. Not everyone. I'm not saying everyone, but there are some people out there that even if the person is perfectly nice with them, perfectly polite, it could just be in passing, but they just can feel a very bad person when they're in the presence of them. And apparently this was Margaret's strong reaction to meeting him. And like I say, Margaret genuinely believed that this guy was called Dave Smith. All right. And she starts asking around. About him around the area, because they're a family that have lived around there for a very long time. They know a lot of people. Kelly knew everyone. People knew Kelly. And so she starts asking, do you know Dave Smith? He's about 32. He's sitting with R. Kelly, And everyone's like, no, I never heard of him. Don't know who you're on about. So she's very, very suspicious at this point, is Margaret. She's like, something going on here. She couldn't quite put a finger on it, though. And it would be Dave who would phone the house to say sometimes he was worried about Kelly, and he didn't know if she was going to college, and making it seem like he was on side with her parents as well. It's all very conniving, very, very manipulative. So at 46, right, which is what the age James is now, it was worked out that he was actually a year older than Kelly's dad, Tommy. She's 16. There's 30 years between them. Margaret eventually finds out they come clean. He says, I didn't want to tell you. I wasn't sure how to tell you because I didn't want you to stop us seeing each other. Right, okay, let me just get this straight. He comes forward and he says he's 32. She's 16. What does he marry if he's 32 or 42? One wouldn't fill me with much more sort of fear than the other one. So why is a 32-year-old man messing around with a 16-year-old girl? It just all very baffling. And a parent said, they had a feeling she was seeing somebody, and they had a feeling that they might be older, but they never thought the age gap would be that big. But she'd always hung about with older people. They just didn't think he was going to be that old. Okay. So now it's come out, James is actually 46. And Kelly would spend a lot of time at James's house, a lot of time. And as she was coming home, times fewer and far between, when she would come home, she'd start to look a bit unkept. Start to look a little bit like her clothes weren't very clean and her hair wasn't washed. She was looking just a little bit quieter, not their normal bubbly Kelly, So we get to autumn 1995 now. Like I say, Kelly's barely coming home. And they felt that he might be abusing Kelly. That's what they felt. They felt like there's something, really odd going on. But they didn't want to go round to his house. They didn't want to go round to his home because they felt they were going to push her further away. they wanted to keep her on side. So if something bad was happening in the relationship, that she felt she could come home, that was a safe place. I think that's the way they would be coming from. And in fact, yes, of course he was abusing Kelly. Of course he was. Viciously abusing her at this point. And like I say, her confidence had took a hit completely. She just wasn't looking after herself at all. She was looking really down. So anyway, she starts coming home, and it starts being noticing that she's got bruises on her. Okay. Now at this point, James wasn't working. So he's not doing anything back at their house where Kelly's living with him. I'll turn that off. I thought I turned that off. Sorry, guys. I thought I turned the volume down. Oh, it all went messy. So James wasn't working. And Kelly herself, she's no longer going to college because he's got her out of there. He can't have her around people who could possibly help her. He's got her out of there. So she's starting to become completely isolated now. All right. And then Margaret sees Kelly. And what it was is they were clashing every time, because even though she was spending so much time at James's, all her stuff was still at home. So occasionally when she'd come back, her and Margaret would clash. You know, Margaret wanted her daughter home. She didn't like what was happening. She didn't like this whole setup. And of course, James is there in Kelly's ear. You know, oh, they don't love you. They don't love you. Take no notice. Come to me. Come and stay with me. I love you. Look at how much I beat you to love you. No, I'm not saying he said that. I'm just saying, you know. But on this one occasion, Kelly had gone home to pack a few things. And anyway, Margaret had come home early, I believe. And she walked in and she seen Kelly packing her stuff and throwing her stuff in. And she wasn't quite answering her. Margaret was saying to her, you know, what are you back for? You know, what, are you staying? What are you doing? And Kelly wasn't really answering. And as she finished packing this bag and turned, Margaret says she'd never seen anything like it in her life. And the whole side of Kelly's face was just black. It was just bruised to just a degree that Margaret said, like I mentioned earlier, her blood just ran cold. And she was so upset. But Kelly basically said that some girls had jumped her, and, you know, a load of them had beat her and one had kicked her in the face, and that's where the bruise had come from. And Margaret's just looking at her, and they've all lived around this area for so long that had never been a thing. You know, Kelly had never had anything like that happen to her. She was very confused by the whole thing, but Kelly basically fobbed her off, argued with her, and left. So Margaret was really, understandably very, very concerned. Next time Kelly came round again, hair all limp and greasy, clothes not washed, hair unwashed. She looked like she was losing weight. And she happened to be in the kitchen, and she turned her arm, and Margaret's seen a massive bite mark on her arm. And again, Kelly fobs it off, saying, oh, I'd either running for the bus or I was by the bus stop and there was a fence and I jumped over and I caught my arm on the fence, you know, just this whole intricate lie all planned out. And Margaret's just looking at her like, no, that doesn't happen. Another time, she's got fingertip bruising to her neck, which was very obvious what that was. She tried to fob that off. And Margaret was just saying, look, I can't live like this. I can't cope with worrying about you like this. And I think when I watched it, I remember thinking, I think she tried to call her bluff. I think when she said, you either stay and come home here now, or you leave. I can't take this stress anymore. I think when she said that to Kelly, I think I think she was calling a bluff, and I don't think she thought for a minute Kelly would call her bluff. And she did. She left. Which was absolutely heartbreaking to Margaret and Tommy. Now, Kelly did go back for a little while to James, but it had started to ramp up again. He was really, really abusive while she was there. She did leave him, okay, but he stalked her until she came back. It was a very short period of time. I haven't heard too much about that happening, although I have heard on a couple of sources that she did try to leave and he did get her back, but I don't know too much about it. Now, Margaret and Tommy themselves, they'd had enough, so they went round to James's house, and they went in. Now, it was very convincing that, yes, it had been these girls that had beat Kelly, and he was just as angry over it. And when he's showing them round his home, which wasn't very nice, Margaret was like, I can't believe my daughter's living here. But there was a hole in the floorboards that he actually pointed out to them and said, oh, be careful when you're stepping over that. And I'll tell you how sick that was in a minute. But he pointed that out to them. And even though they're in his home, Kelly brings them in a drink, like a cup of tea, and she's very meek and mild as she's doing it. So she's just doing as she's told. It's all very creepy. But they just didn't want to push her away. That, she kind of convinced them that it was okay and she loved him and he was very good to her. And they left. They left the house. But when they left, Margaret, feeling so uneasy, she called the police. And of course, they're asking, have you seen any proof? Do you know this happening? Etc. etc. She didn't have any proof. So they gave her some advice and they said, call up the doctors and book an appointment in Kelly's name. Go to that appointment yourself and just tell the doctor your concerns. And, if Kelly of her own back goes in there with any marks or, for any particular suspicious reason, the doctor will be aware that there's concerns for her safety. But we don't know. Well, we do know, sorry. I take that back. We do know Kelly never actually went to the doctors again. So there was never that chance to intervene on the doctor's behalf. And at this point now, we come up to November of 1995. And Kelly doesn't actually see anyone again from that time. She doesn't get to see anyone again. She calls home. She makes calls home. She had been working. She had a little job, but he managed to get her out of that, so she couldn't work anymore. And yeah, she just never went back to work, and no one saw her. So people started to get really concerned because, like I say, Margaret and Tommy had only spoke to her on the phone. The neighbours were getting concerned that they hadn't seen her out and about. And when one of the neighbours approached James and was like, I haven't seen your Kelly in a while, he actually gets Kelly to wave from the bedroom window from a chair she sat in. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, Margaret and Tommy, now it's coming into March of 96. Margaret and Tommy were planning to go round. They were planning to go round there again because they hadn't seen her. They hadn't seen her in months. They'd spoken to her, but they hadn't seen her. So they were going to go round. But as they were discussing it, Kelly's brother came in and says that his friend had seen her and she seemed okay. No, then we know she wasn't going out. So I don't understand that bit. Did he get confused with somebody? Had it been a further time frame and he was like, yeah, I seen her not long ago and it had actually been months. I'm not too sure how that time frame works out, but he reckons he saw her. They believed him and they thought, right, okay, we won't go around. We don't want to upset her. So we get to the March 10th, 1996 now. And Margaret calls James's house and she speaks to Kelly. And Kelly, she said she sounded okay at this point. She sounded not her chirpy self by any means, but she sounded okay. And she promised to come round for the following week for Mother's Day. But when Mother's Day comes, now Mother's Day was on the Mother's Day and their anniversary, I believe, that Tommy and Margaret's anniversary was on the same weekend, and 2 cards came, and there was one for the anniversary and one for Mother's Day. And when Tommy walked in, Margaret kind of threw the cards at him. She's like, she ain't with them. And he looked at them and he could tell they weren't his daughter's writing. So, look, I'm not going to give anyone any stick, but why are they the... Anyway, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. Right, okay. So, we get to now April 16th, 1996. So it's about 6 weeks later. All right. James walks into a police station. Okay. And he tells the police that Kelly has drowned in the bath. They had been arguing, but it had been an accident and she drowned in the bath. Can you just come round and get her? Can you come and collect her? So police found that a bit hard and they're like, right, okay. So they go around to the house, and when they get there and they walk into James's house, they're immediately hit with the fact that there is blood everywhere. There's blood in every room they walk into as they get to the bathroom. And yes, Kelly is in the bath. Yes, she's quite obviously deceased. She's at this point 17 years old. And as they look at this young girl, this young woman, they realise that this isn't a drowning. That's not, well, that's how she died. But that's not what just happened. So they take James out and immediately charge him with first-degree murder. Okay. So the mortician comes in and takes Kelly, obviously, and performs the autopsy on her. And I'm going to tell you what Kelly, I believe, went through for months, but the most egregious injuries would have happened between but from 5 days to anything up to a month, maybe in the 6 weeks it had been since she'd spoke to her mum. Okay. So in the autopsy, Kelly had 150 different injury sites, 150 of them. Within those injuries, she had a lot of burns, which she had burns from cigarettes. She also had burns from boiling water that had been poured on her bum and on her left leg. He said maybe this was to stop her from walking. Also to stop her from walking, her hands and her knees had been smashed and broken. Her arm had been fractured. She also had other broken bones. Her ears, her eyebrows, her mouth, and her genitals had been mutilated, so they were unrecognisable. She'd been tied up by her hair to the radiator, and while she's tied up by her hair to the radiator, she was being scalped, and it was said that it had been intermittently, so it's like she wasn't being scalped all in one go. It was said that the pain that she must have been in during those episodes of while he was scalping this, I keep going to say child, but she still was. They said it must have been horrifically painful for her. She was branded on her thigh with an iron. She was stabbed with scissors in her mouth, possibly pruning scissors. As happens with the majority of these, and I say it all the time, she was then starved. She had no food or water, possibly for days before her death. In fact, she'd lost 44 pounds from when her parents had last seen her. It's a lot of weight for a young, not very big girl anyway. Now, the worst thing they came up against is then they realised that both of her eyes had been gouged out. Okay? And the coroner said that this was done, like I said earlier, between 5 days and a month before this girl died. Well, I think 3 weeks, sorry. 5 days to 3 weeks before this girl actually died. And it said that the nerves would be exposed, so the pain would be horrific anyway. And there was knife or scissor marks in the eye holes after. So they said the pain of that would have actually sent her mentally off. Like, to cope with that pain, it would have actually affected her mentally if everything else hadn't. But there's another case I've heard of a girl who her boyfriend had also done that to her. He'd gouged out both of her eyes. This girl did live, but she said that he tried to drown her. Was it a copycat? I don't know. I don't know too much about that particular story, but it said that when she was put into the cold bath, the pain of the cold water going into her sockets was like hot pokers had been put into them. She says the pain just, you can't get away from it. She said it's just horrific. So the pain this child must have been going through is just awful. He'd strangled her. He'd just done everything to her. I mean, like I say, he'd mutilated so many parts of her. But that general says with stuff he'd used, like a garden fork. He'd used many cutlery implements. She'd been stabbed with forks and knives. He'd just use anything he'd got hold of on her. And do you remember me saying when Tommy and Margaret had gone round to visit, and he'd said, "Oh, watch that floorboard there." If Kelly wasn't tied up to the heater by her hair, when he wasn't doing that and scalping her, he was just forcing her into the hole in these floorboards, and that's where he was keeping her. So it was either place, that's where she was being kept. And saying that to her parents when they come round, there's a special place in hell for this guy. There really is. There's a special place in hell for him. And poor Tommy, sorry, before then, the police had gone round to Margaret's and Tommy's, obviously, to tell them what had happened. And as soon as the police walked in, Margaret's like, he's killed her. He's killed her. She just knew. She says, as soon as they walked in the door, she knew what had happened. And Tommy himself, he had to go and ID Kelly, and he just says he didn't recognise her. He didn't recognise his child. He didn't recognise it, like the damage that had been done to her. And Margaret said that people call him an animal, but an animal wouldn't do that to another animal. And she did say that basically she wonders what Kelly was thinking, and she feels guilty. You know, was Kelly thinking, why aren't they coming to help me, kind of thing? I gotta admit, I don't know. I don't know what that girl had been thinking. I genuinely don't know. I can't even imagine. It's just very sad to think that they were going to go around there. And the brother's friend was like, no, I've seen her. They were going to go around there that Mother's Day, when the card didn't come through. And they basically decided not to because they didn't want to push her away or make things worse, make matters worse. I mean, upon the date, we don't know, could that have been before he'd done what he'd done to her eyes or after, but could they have well, they could have saved her, but I just don't know. I don't know. And it must have been so hard. Must be so hard for them to live with. I just, you know, as a couple, I know they didn't give many interviews because I think they got a lot of stick over this case because it hit the whole country, didn't it? It went nationwide. Everyone heard about it, of course. Child's 14, she's 15, 16. Why was she allowed to be with him? Why didn't they do anything? You know, and they didn't really give interviews because I believe they just wanted to be left alone. The medical examiner basically said it was the worst case he'd ever seen in over 600 cases. The trial was in November 1996, where he had the audacity to plead manslaughter. He was like, I didn't mean to do it. And basically, he blamed a lot of it on Kelly herself because apparently she would dare him. She would dare him to hurt her. And then when he'd hurt her, she'd go in and make it worse. And she told him to take her eyes out. She told him to do that. That he honestly thought the jury were going to believe this. That a 17-year-old girl would be like, do it. Dare. Just ridiculous. Witnesses came forward, i.e. his ex-girlfriends. Obviously, the beatings that he'd given them came into play. The fact that he tried to drown them came into play. So eventually, it was said that what had happened was on the day of, was it August? Sorry, on April the 16th, 1996, on that day, he'd actually been beating Kelly around the head with the shower head. And he'd beat her into the bath and drowned her in the bath. Or she was beaten unconscious, fell into the bath and died that way. There's a few different stories I'm hearing, but she drowned in the bath. That's what happened. So like I say, he pled to manslaughter, but that didn't work, and his sentence was guilty on to first degree murder. Okay. He was given life in prison, which should have been 25 years as life in prison. That's what they were saying, which he would have released in 2021. Now the jury all were offered professional counselling after this trial, because of what they'd have to see, what they'd had to view when they had to saw her body, and going through all the injuries she'd had, the fact of how she was young, it broke them all. And they all took the counselling. All 12 took the counselling. I think that says a lot. Now, like I said, Margaret and Tommy, they gave very, very limited interviews. But what she did say is she wished she'd have used that bread knife back when she'd very, very first met him. She wished she'd have took on that feeling that she had and gone with it. And if she was ever given the chance again, she would do it. Just such a shame. Margaret actually passed away in 2020. She was only 65 when she died. She died of respiratory failure after beating cancer twice. Now, she died before he was due for parole, so she didn't have to go through that. But he came up for his parole hearing in 2022. And he was rejected for that parole. He was 74 at the time, and obviously this year he's 76. He's still in prison. And in 2022, when they turned him down, they said that they still believed he could be a danger to society, even at 72 years of age. So they could still just see a rotten man inside and out. And that's to do that to such a young girl. And they said they couldn't understand why he escalated to so much that he hadn't kind of escalated to that degree with his previous partners. And it was said that he possibly felt that Kelly might leave him. And so the smashing of her knees and her hands, breaking her arm, branding her, burning her, finally taking out her eyes. That might stop her leaving him. Can't leave him now. So, oh God, it's just awful. This one is. It really is. And that was the case that shocked Britain. The Kellyanne Bates story. Like I said, originally heard it on Britain's Darkest Taboos. Heard it on other platforms as well. And it's still, even after all these years, still makes my blood run cold. And I genuinely now know what that saying means. It just leaves you feeling, oh, just you see the picture of him and he's just, I don't know if any of you've seen the picture of him. You've got it. There is another picture out there, which is really odd. It's a really odd thing. I don't know why people think that's the real picture, and it's like looks like a tall guy with dark hair, slimmer, and you see that as James Patterson's picture. I don't know if you've seen it out there, and it's like, that's not him. The picture I've seen of him, it's like kind of a passport photo, I suppose you'd say, size. Oh God. You see both photos. And you know exactly who James Patterson is. You know exactly which one he is. Even if you've never seen him and you don't know, if someone showed you the two, you'd be like, that's him. Because you just know. He's just awful. Ugh, just a horrible guy. So yeah, how are we all after that one? That's still Vaughan's over